Welcome to our sixth session as part of our study in the US series. Today's session is titled Applying for MBAs in the US, and we have with us two wonderful panelists who I will introduce to you. Very quickly, just an outline of what we are going to be doing today. I will introduce you to Project EduAccess, tell you a little bit about the series that we're doing, introduce you to the panelists who will then take over, give you an overview of applications to business schools, give you a sense of the timeline, talk to you a little bit about application documents. Sorry about timeline again. Then just preparing for GRE GMAT. What does an SOP and a CV for MBA courses look like? And then give you some general tips, and then we move to the Q&A. Very quickly, we are Project EduAccess. So we believe that access to higher education, leadership, and professional opportunities is a privilege that most people from marginalized communities are systematically denied through cost, information, and dispositional barriers. And we try to improve inclusivity in some of these spaces by removing some of these barriers for marginalized communities in the global South. We do this by 4 key interventions, and this workshop series, along with our other series, are part of our attempt to make information more accessible to people aiming for higher education abroad. As I said, this session is a part of a series that we're doing titled Study in the US. We've already done quite a few sessions already. You can watch the recording of these sessions on our YouTube channel. I'll send a link to that in chat shortly. Today's session is applying for MBAs in the US, and tomorrow we do a session on scholarships for graduate programs in the US, and then next week we end with an application clinic, which is basically a Q&A session where you can come and bring any questions that you have about applications to study in the US. And finally, we have two really wonderful panelists joining us today to talk to you about making an application to business schools. We have with us Akshita, who graduated from LSR and is currently studying in Stanford University in their business school. And we have with us Jaya, who's also graduated from LSR and is currently at Wharton, University of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us and for doing the session. We're really glad you can speak to everyone. And Jaya, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Misbah. One quick, edit there. I'm class of 23, so I have graduated. But okay, let's get started with just that question of why consider an MBA, right? I think from a career perspective, there's like one of three things I've mostly seen people do. It's either to make a geographic shift in where they're working. It's either to make a industry pivot, so like change the industry that they're working in, or it is to get like a faster track growth in their current career. Talking a little bit more about each of these, I'd say any of these MBAs, they're globally renowned, so they can open doors across the globe for you, but typically people choose to do an MBA in a geography that they potentially want to also pursue a career in. A lot of my friends from business school have gone back to sort of their home countries, but a lot choose to stay back in the US because it opens a lot more doors to find jobs here. In terms of changing your sort of industry, that's a big one. That was one for me. I was coming from like an online education background, wanted to get into consulting. This is a good place to sort of pivot because people are open to hiring MBAs irrespective of sort of their backgrounds. And then in terms of the faster track career, obviously you gain a lot of sort of softer skills, leadership skills, but also a lot of like functional and like broad area of industry knowledge. So it makes you pretty sort of ready to pivot into any industry or even sort of continue to upskill or like grow faster in your current role. It can be it doesn't have to be one of three things. It can be a mix of all of these. Like for me, it was both geographic and career pivot, but broadly sort of touches on these three topics. I think one other very important benefit is definitely the people aspect. Business schools have people coming from many different sort of geographies, countries, many different work experiences. And I don't think, at least in my life, I've had such an opportunity to meet people with like such different backgrounds and experiences and like truly learn from how they've navigated life or like how they're thinking about life ahead. So that for me has definitely been sort of the biggest takeaway so far, 1 year out of MBA. In terms of work experience, yes, like it says, the average is 5 years, 28 to 30 is the average age group, but I wouldn't say that defines anything. Personally, for me, when I went to business school, I had 3 years of work experience. But yeah, like a progression in your workplace and just how you can talk about your story, things you're passionate about, truly make an impact on your application. So while these can be guidances, you shouldn't take it as like you have to meet these as like a threshold in terms of trying to get into one of these programs. Um, you can go to the next one. Um, Very important, I think, is you sort of start your business school research in terms of truly understanding that what is it that you want to do post MBA, and do those schools have those resources to provide you that, right? And it's like, where do you get started with that? I think the first place would definitely be the schools themselves. Like they would have websites, they'd have career offices, all of whom are like really helpful. They'll have all of these stats posted about like what kind of jobs people go into, what is like the expected salary, things like that. All of this is very publicly available, both from the universities, but also from like third party websites. So like I think that's a good place to start. I think another thing that was really helpful for me was just looking up alumni from the school on LinkedIn and like looking at what are the industries, or sort of what is the work that they're doing now. And honestly, that's something I do even right now as I think about sort of my career, right? Of like, what are some paths people have taken who've had similar journeys as me. Um, in terms of like what are the big industries, I think across business schools, the four mentioned here, which is like consulting, finance, tech, tend to be a big chunk of sort of the recruitment. So a lot of your classmates will go into these industries. Entrepreneurship can vary school to school. So if that's a path you want to sort of pursue, you should sort of look more into which school has those resources to provide you with support during your MBA to do that. I already touched on salary expectation. I think, again, very publicly available schools are very open about what the average salary is, and data around what salaries people get post an MBA there. Especially for US, very important to sort of think about your visa situation, work options. There's a lot there. There's, again, a lot of resources even once you come in, that you can leverage at the university level to understand what is really needed, but just something that's going to have to be constantly sort of in your mind, because it does sort of renew every year or like change every year. There's a lot of complications to it. I'm not going to get into that part of it now. There's ways for you to stay back here if that's something that's interesting to you, but visa is something you should definitely continue to look into even once you're here and even as you think of applying. Selecting the right program. So I already touched a little bit on geography here, right? Which is that if you want to be in a certain geography, like if you want to be in the US post your MBA, an MBA from the US is going to be extremely beneficial to do that, especially since I mentioned the visa restrictions and stuff like that. It just becomes a lot easier if you have education here. Duration, yes, most schools have like multiple options. Like I know Wharton has an executive MBA program, which is like happens on weekends. I did sort of the full-time program wherein you sort of quit your job, do the MBA full-time for 2 years. I know Kellogg does a 1 year program, but all school, like most schools have like a mix of different options that they provide. So worth looking into in terms of what best sort of fits your current life stage. Cost of business school programs also very important. We'll touch a little bit on scholarships and funding later, but I would say, again, very publicly available information. Um, Cost of the tuition, not too much you can do there, but a lot of times it also sort of living costs add up. So schools in, of course, New York would be more expensive than Philly, right? Like the cost of studying in a school in New York would be more expensive than Philly just because of living expenses. So important to think about sort of the holistic picture of expenses and not just the tuition that might be on the school's website. Post MBA career and trajectory of alumni, we spoke about this already. Elevator pitch for the school, I think really important, especially for example, I think Wharton sort of has this rep of being like the finance school, which is true. We do have a very sort of analytically focused curriculum, but having said that, there is a lot of flexibility in terms of what curriculum you do. There is a lot of people who go into consulting, a lot of people who go into tech. So I just feel like when we talk about USP, it's important to go one level deeper and truly understand what the school stands for and what they might have a rep for, right? And how do you do that? When you start with the website, usually schools will have a lot of sort of messaging there in terms of what they stand for. But for me, I would say the most useful thing was talking to alumni, like, or current students. So like actually reaching out to them on LinkedIn and telling them you're interested in applying to the school, want to learn more. You will, in most cases, you'll hear back from a few. You can talk to them, ask them to make connections to people who've either had a similar path or have similar interests as you. But I'd say that's the better place to sort of truly gauge what a school stands for. Uh, which for me in this case, like once I started doing this, I realized that sort of Wharton's focus on like being more team-based and collaborative and things like that. So I think there is that level two of information that you need to get to truly understand if that school is a fit for you. Um, Already spoke about sort of connecting with alumni and current students. Yeah, I think we're done with this side. So this is more of a high level of everything that you need from an application perspective. We'll go into the first three elements deeper as we go ahead in this presentation. But yes, you need either a GMAT or a GRE score. You need to have your resume updated, making sure it's sort of communicating the story that you're going to talk about in your application as well. So highlighting experiences that tie into that. Um, Essays, most schools have like their own sort of questions that you need to answer. So it's not like one general sort of statement of purpose kind of an application. Each school will have its own set of either one, two, three, I think it varies, but questions that you would specifically need to answer for that application process. So it's actually a very tailored process. It's not like you can sort of prepare one essay and then apply to multiple schools. And then in terms of letter of recommendation, I think the only tip I would have here is a lot of times we think about sort of what is the highest level of the person in the organization that I can get to write my LOR, right? I think a better or even a more important filter in my mind is to think about who's someone who can truly talk to your experiences, like who's someone you've actually worked closely with, who can talk about those spikes in your career and what that progression has looked like for you, because I think that is the more important part of the story, because you do want all of this to tie in together with what you are talking about yourself as well, right? In terms of your growth. Make it flip to the next. Okay, so on the tests themselves, I personally took the GMAT, so I have a little bit more sort of information on that. But I do know, like, very important to look at the format and the scoring system. I remember when I took the GMAT, which was a couple of years ago, so maybe things have changed, please double check. But we could still choose this section or like the order of the sections that you wanted to take the exam in, which I think was very important for me, just in terms of making sure I ace the test. So things like that, right? Like if you don't do the research, you wouldn't know till you go for the exam that you have all of these options. I think recently GMAT's also changed its sections and replaced IR with something, but yeah, do refer to sort of their official website for the most standard information, most updated information. Preparation time for 4 to 6 months sounds about right. Personally, for me, I was doing it while I was in undergrad, so I took a little bit longer time just because I had a little bit more time on hand. But I think with work, it's typically 4 to 6 months. I will let Akshita opine on that. I think she's done GMAT with work. So
Yeah, I think, well, hi everyone. Very excited to be here. Picking up from where Jaya left off, the GMAT, I think for me was one of the biggest hurdles in the MBA process. I think it depends from person to person how you and like how you do on these tests and how long it takes for you to prep. Doing it, I think sooner and in undergrad was better. I think that was the right move on Jaya's part. I feel like doing it alongside work took me longer, and I was also out of the study mindset, which then you have to kind of go back into test taking practices and so on. But having said that, I think, yeah, the GMAT is one of the most critical pieces, and you should definitely aim to get this out of the way before you begin your whole application journey. Jaya, do you want to take back?
I can take it
Yeah.
back, yes. I just wanted to make sure we get GMAT with work perspective here. In terms of resources, I think there's so much available online. You can choose to either do it with like some centers that do it as a coaching. I personally primarily used the GMAT stuff, which is the official GMAT sort of council. They have a lot of books that are on each of those sections. So personally used a lot of that. They also have mock tests, used that. I'd say that's one source of resources. There's also a ton other listed here, which you can definitely refer to. And then, like Akshita said, it is a very important part of sort of the application process. Important to try and sort of get your highest score. I think a good place to again benchmark that is you can look at some of the averages these schools have. That also helps you sort of set targets for yourself and think about which schools will be the best sort of fits when it comes to the GMAT or the GRE score. I think, yeah, that sounds perfect. I will hand over to Akshita to take it over from here.
Perfect. Um, I think on the GMAT front, one thing I heard a lot was that will you get in if you don't have a great score, or like how much does it matter if you have a 730 versus a 750? I think it depends from school to school, but the GMAT is definitely like what gets your foot in the door, after which the schools are then looking at your resume, your LORs, and your other documents that you're submitting. And so I would say the resume and GMAT are probably the main ones. And we should probably focus now on the CV part. So think of this as the one pager that's telling them everything, telling a school or an adcom everything they need to know about you, and what you've done in your professional life to date. So they definitely want to see that you have leadership potential, what you've done in the past to prove that you are a leader, whether that's projects in your undergrad experience, projects at work, or like any initiatives you're taking on beyond work, and that you have a passion for something and you've kind of pushed on in that direction. American MBA programs, I think, also value global exposure a lot. So are you well traveled? Are you exposed to different cultures? Have you worked with people from different backgrounds, whether within the country, across countries? The idea being that as you're coming into the MBA program, it's a very diverse cohort that you're going to be with. And so they also want to understand that you will be able to make the most of this, and bring your best self to that program. Being more tactical in like how to write things in your CV, or like how to portray your experience. I think one of the biggest pieces is to be as quantitative as possible. So instead of saying I grew the team and we were very successful, you say I increased the team efficiency by X% and we grew the budget by X million dollars and so on. So they want to kind of contextualize your impact and your role in that organization in terms of these numbers or these budgets that you're going to be portraying. In terms of like what background you're coming from, what you've done, I think a lot of schools can be agnostic to like your specific career paths, your like industries, but I think they care more about within your industry or within the company that you worked for. What was your growth like? Did you start as maybe an associate, and then how quickly did you kind of go up that ladder? Or that even in that role, what are the other things that you took on beyond your day job? And so it's a very holistic perspective of like, what did that growth look like in your company or across these companies that maybe if you've moved around. Obviously, awards, recognitions, anything that's more public facing helps you build credibility, because at the end of the day, you are an applicant on a piece of paper, putting yourself out there through a resume. And so anything that can tell them or like help them contextualize you against other applicants will help your case. And I think the last 4 points are kind of more tactical in terms of have a one-page resume. Even if you've done a lot of work, or even if you've done like a lot of projects across your few years of experience, think through the most important pieces and draw your attention to those. I think people who have say 8 to 10 years of experience coming into the MBA, even they have a one pager. So I think staying in that one page limit is very important. And then with that one page format, obviously keep it clean, easy to read, avoid jargon, avoid excessive words, and truly think about what are the most important aspects of your experience and draw their attention to that. So Jaya touched on the essays for these schools. Most of these, or I would say there are groups of schools that have similar prompts. So one, for example, will be what are your post-MBA goals, and how can XYZ school help you achieve them? And there'll maybe be two, three similar ones like this. A few schools like HBS and Stanford have slightly different ones. Like Stanford's was what matters most to you and why. But then the second one was how can or like why do you want the Stanford MBA? So typically, I think it helps to think through these many schools and figure out which ones have overlapping essays, and then start crafting your story. um the schools are truly looking for you to answer that very like that exact question. They're not looking for you to get philosophical or go in any other direction. They just want to know that you've looked at the program, you've thought through your career progression, and that this MBA is truly critical for you, as they're also thinking about you against other applicants and why they should pick you over someone else. It helps to be clear in your thoughts and then what you're trying to get out of this MBA experience. A lot of these essays can also require you to be, I would say, slightly vulnerable and draw experiences from your personal and professional journey. They want to kind of see what challenges you've gone through and how that shapes you as a future leader. And so, kind of sharing a little bit about your background can be very helpful in providing some color in like what you're coming from, what background you have, and then why you look at the world in a certain way. Something else that is very typical of MBA applicants is that they are typically more self-aware or have thought through or reflected enough to jot down these ideas, stories, thoughts that they're putting in the application. So you need to be able to, I think, identify your strengths and your weaknesses, and then put that across to the school to say why you still need the MBA and why that specific school is best suited for you. And then that brings me to my next point around finding that fit with the school. So if there's, and I can draw an example here in my own case. So it was very important for me to be in an entrepreneurial environment. And I said that because I grew up around entrepreneurs and I wanted to be one, but I didn't feel like my experiences to that date had provided me any platform that would help me kind of dive deeper in that direction. And so Stanford's program was a very, very good fit because the culture of the school and the broader university is exactly that. And furthermore, like being in the Silicon Valley area was very important to further go down that same path. So kind of drawing on those insights of like what do you want out of the MBA? Why is that school specifically the best for you? And that you've done that research and that what you're looking for is probably only available in that school is very important to communicate. And then I think a sanity check in this essay or like SOP process would be to write, rewrite, give it time. I think any good essay takes about 3 to 4 weeks at minimum. So write a draft, come back to it in a few days, iterate on that, show it to people that you trust and who understand you and who know you. Maybe people who've gone through the MBA process or recently applied, so they can truly look at it from an objective perspective and tell you whether, what you've written makes sense, or or if you've maybe, not been able to portray your ideas clearly. And so getting that outside perspective can be very critical in making sure that you're doing a good job of it. Okay, so the application timeline. It's a long process. So whenever you're getting into the MBA application journey, you should be prepared to spend about 6 to 7 months at minimum. Once you've had your GMAT or GRE score out of the way, I would say like get that done as soon as possible. think through whether you want a consultant or a college counselor. I did use one, and I think Jaya used one as well. The advantage with having a consultant or a college counselor is that they know these schools well, and they kind of help you with that outside in perspective of your essays, your LORs, and everything else. And they keep you on track in terms of your timelines, in terms of the content, and then also helping you decide which schools to apply to, which ones you have a better chance of getting into. And they have a lot of resources from across many years of doing this for their jobs. And so I think they definitely bring a lot of value. Having said that, they are expensive. So thinking through how many schools you want to apply to, how many schools do you want to use your consultant to help with, is also going to be something that you make a decision on. So if I'm, say, applying in 2025 for my MBA, I would get my GMAT out of the way as soon as possible. And then towards the middle of the next year, I would draft resume, start thinking through schools, do my research to figure out what their deadlines are, how many rounds they have. So some schools will have 2 rounds, like Harvard Business School has round 1, round 2, which means September and then December or Jan. Other schools will have 3 rounds. But typically, as international students, you want to aim for the first 2 rounds because that's when the most number of admits happen. Round 3 is, I think, mostly seen as like it's harder to get into. And I think it's more local applicants that would apply in that round and make it. So aim for round 1 or round 2. So if you have the round 1 deadline in September, typically before that, you would have your essays out of the way, you would have your GMAT score, and you would have your letter of recommendation. Now, even the letter of recommendation can take a few weeks to get done. So if you're working with, like if you have your immediate boss at your workplace writing this letter of recommendation, you want to get them started on it as soon as possible. You want to give them the relevant information that you need to, and then help them meet that deadline. That's the September one. So once you've applied, you will hear back from universities, say sometime in October, saying that you have an interview or you have like a group discussion that's more Wharton's format. And in this duration, you might also want to do some research on what scholarship or aid applications are open and what you can apply to. There's typically more scholarship and aid options in the earlier rounds, and their deadlines are also in alignment with the round 1 deadlines. So that is something you have to take on parallelly. But yeah, once you've done the interview and once you've applied for these scholarships or aids, typically November to December is when you would hear about, how whether you got in or whether you didn't. And then based on those results, if you still want to get, apply to other schools, you would then go through round 2, which is in Jan. And then that follows a similar process. Some schools will also have a rolling admission process. So Columbia, for example, has early application format where you can apply anytime from like Jan to September, October of that year, and they'll get back to you on your whether you got an interview or not, or whether you got in or not, on a rolling basis. So they're not looking for like one specific deadline. And so in those cases, you want to make sure you apply sooner rather than later, to maximize your chances. I think a big question that people often have is like, when do we apply? How many schools do we apply to? And which school should we apply to in round 1, round versus round 2? I think this is very, very subjective, but some things that are consistent, I would say, are that you want to focus on a better application as opposed to like getting in the earlier round just so you have a better chance. So if you're rushing to meet timelines for round 1, there's no point in doing that. Focus on your application, make it the best possible, and then apply in round 2. Your chances are not significantly increased or diminished, but at least you've done your best. For rolling admissions, or in the case of Columbia, apply as soon as you can. And then in terms of how many schools you want to apply to, this is a very subjective choice in terms of how much time you have and how much money you want to put into the application process. And then also, is your goal to go to a very specific MBA program, or is the goal to get an MBA in this specific year, or is the goal to move to the US? So based on, I mean, where you are in that process, you would decide how many you want to apply to. I applied to, I think, about 7 programs across the 2 rounds. And the reasoning was that I knew I wanted an MBA and I knew that I wanted to do it that very year. I was a little more flexible in terms of which programs I went to. But at the same time, I know people who would just apply to the top 3 programs or top 5 programs. And that's perfectly fine. I think it depends on what your priorities are. Applications can cost anywhere between 150 to 250, I would say. So thinking through how many applications you want to do based on that is also important. Some schools will offer you a waiver on the application fee if you can prove certain criteria, whether it's, I think it's diversity or need-based quotas that they have, and they would waive your application fee. So if that's the case, I would say you should apply to more schools. That way you're maximizing your chances. But I completely understand that this application fee is a significant barrier for a lot of people. Um, each application, even though the essays are overlapping in some way, each application does take its individual time because, like Jaya was mentioning, you have to do the research, you have to talk to individual, like alums or current students or their admission teams or officers to understand the schools better, understand the program. So going through all that research for these schools is very important, and that also takes time. So I would say aiming for between 2 to 7 schools is a safe space where some of these will be your safety schools, some of these will be your target schools, and some of these will be your reach schools. And then according to how you place these out across those many rounds, you can see, if you want to keep applying in the next round or if you're happy with the results that you have from one round. Which schools to apply to in round 1 versus round 2? I think it's tough. Some people have the opinion that you should aim for the best schools or your most high ranked schools in the first round, and then in the second round you can maybe adjust your expectations if those don't work out. Alternatively, what I did was I applied to a few schools across safety, target, and reach in round 1 to see where I was standing in the application process and how I was comparing against other or like the general applicant pool. And then based on the results from the round 1, when I felt like I got into some of my safety and target schools, I then applied to my reach schools, which were HBS and Stanford, and then waited for those results to pan out. So either strategy works. I think it depends a lot on your specific application, how many people similar to you are applying, and then how and when will you stand out. So something to think about maybe down the line. Okay, funding the MBA. So Jaya mentioned you'll see the costs for these programs on their websites. It is, I think, one of the most expensive programs. And the reason is that you're coming in with work experience, so these universities understand that you may have earned a little bit in the past, especially if you've worked in the US, they know you've built some amount of savings. However, they are kind of pricing these programs high because they know that your post MBA earning potential is also going to be high. And so you can afford this degree, which I don't think is always true. So I think looking at financial aid and looking at scholarships is super, super important. Each school has different scholarships or aid options available. So look at the websites, keep an eye out on their any newsletters they're sending out or any info sessions that they're having to figure out that, what are the deadlines and how can you make sure you have the best chance. These could be need based, or these could be diversity focused or merit based. Some schools will do all of these, some schools will just do need based. So Stanford, for example, does not have a merit based or diversity focused scholarship, at least none that applied to me. but they do have a need base. So looking at the fact that I was working in India prior to this, and obviously my salary would never be able to afford the MBA in US dollars, they understand that you have a need based, you match the need based criteria, and then they offer you some, kind of they supplement your payments, means through university endowment and so on. There are also some external organizations, like the Ford Fellows Program, the Rhodes Scholarship, who will be able to provide you full or partial scholarships. Some of these may also be in the form of grants that you can use for specific travel or specific projects or specific use cases. So they may not all be supporting the tuition payments, but maybe a part of it. One option that a lot of people use is that of having their companies or their past employers sponsor them for the MBA. So if you're coming from a consulting firm like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, or even banks, even finance companies, they will often give you the chance to go to your MBA. They'll pay for it and then have you come back to that company after your MBA, and you can either pay off that loan in small installments. Alternatively, I guess, Jaya, is it more pay off, pay back, or is it more like forgiving that sponsorships? Yeah, sponsorship.
Sponsorships, I think there is one which is like given to you and you pay it back. There's both versions of it. I don't have too much insight into it, but at least for Wharton, from what I know, it's either like a tuition forgiveness or
Mm-hmm.
you sort of give it back to the school.
Okay. And then so yeah, sorry, on that point, if you're in these industries or if you have a company that would be willing to sponsor you, it's a worthwhile option to look into, especially because it takes off the pressure of looking for funding and then
I
supporting.
misunderstood your question. I'll tell you that. You don't have, yeah, if you choose to go back to I thought you were talking about the school scholarship. If you choose to go back to the firms have conditions. So if you choose to, if you follow through on those conditions, you keep the scholarship.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Yeah, and then on the loan front, so yeah, you can take a loan um, in your home country or in India or even in the US. Depends a lot on the the interest rates at that given point, and then what amount of loan you're able to draw from either country. Sometimes the Indian bank loans will not cover your whole tuition. And so thinking through alternative sources is also important. And then this is something that you would typically do once you've gotten in. But I would say looking into it before applying is also helpful to know what path you're going down. And then once you're on campus or once you're here, the US doesn't typically allow you to work in your first year on a F1 visa. There are some loopholes to that where, if you're doing an on-campus job, if you're doing a TA-ship with professors, that's okay. But typically you can't be earning outside of that. But in your second year or in the summer between your first and second year, you can work. But again, all of this income is going to be supplemental. It's not going to be significant enough to fund your MBA, but it's going to be, obviously it'll help towards your living expenses and your rents, etc. Okay, amazing. Misbah, back to you.
Yes, thank you so much. That was really comprehensive and super helpful. Thank you so much, both of you. We now move to the Q&A section of the session. So if you have any questions, you can put it in chat, or you can raise your hand and ask your questions directly to the speakers. You can also send it as a DM if that's something you're more comfortable with. So yeah, let's begin. I have one question in my DM, which is asking if schools don't say that GMAT or GRE is compulsory, should we still take it?
I think so. Maybe one of the many schools or few schools that you might be applying to will say that GMAT is not compulsory. If it's not, I think that's great. It reduces the barriers to your application, so you should definitely go give that a shot. But if you want to be more comprehensive in your application process and you want to apply to many schools, the GMAT is something you will have to do, a GMAT or GRE. So you might as well give it a shot. But that's my take. I don't know what you think, Jaya.
No, I think I agree, especially because like most schools I looked at, everyone needed it. So I don't know which subset does not, but if that exists, like Akshita said, that's great. But I think if, yeah, you want to get here and want to apply to a broad range of schools, you're probably not gonna be able to get around it.
Maybe one point there is that having a good GMAT score gives the school like another point of it just gives you more credibility because they can, understand like, okay, what your caliber is, or like how you do how you did on that test. So I think it gives them more confidence in your application. Um, so I think having it might be more beneficial, but at the same time, if it's something that you just don't want to do and you don't have the time to do, that's also fine.
Yeah, that's helpful. Another question is, what would you suggest is the best way to connect with alumni and develop your network?
For me personally, I can talk through my journey. I'll pass it over to you, Akshita, after that. But I personally mostly used LinkedIn, and that obviously has a little bit of a lead time. I think it's also helpful if in your personal like existing network, people know somebody, you can always leverage that, ask them to connect you to somebody. But once you speak to a couple of people, they're always very helpful and they'll connect you to others who you sort of want to get connected with, either in your industry, from your country, or like career paths as you're interested in. So I think yes, of course, the first one, if you don't have that in, is a little bit of a lead time, but after that, it's pretty easy to sort of continue to keep getting connected with people. Um, yeah, and I think there's also like a lot of people who are like current students will be in some official roles on the website of the school. So they'll be like admissions fellows or things like that. They have basically signed up for this. So they are going to be very responsive. So that would also be one group you want to reach out to if you want to get connected to the school. But Akshita, anything to add there?
I think all those points are valid. And then if you're not able to get access to someone, I think reaching out to the admissions team and saying, hey, my background is XYZ, I'm from this country, I'm looking to speak to someone who is pursuing XYZ club or is interested in this career path after graduation. Can you please help me connect? I think if you can't reach the MBA fellow or like admissions fellows, the school should be able to, find someone for you to talk to, and then help you with that.
So there's two more questions in my DM, and then I'll read the one that's in main chat. Though another one is, what is an average GMAT score for more high-end universities? And then relatedly, what are some of the best resources to prepare for GMAT?
I think I don't know the latest high average. I know Wharton, the year that I applied was 730, but it is very easily available if you just research it. Each school should have that number, or there'll be like third-party websites that do that sort of consolidation. So it should be easy to find. In terms of resources, I already sort of spoke about my journey, which was I primarily used materials from GMAC, which is the GMAT sort of council that designs the exam. I also, because I'd done it in undergrad, I was also preparing for CAT, so I'd done like a combination tuition thing. But in hindsight, I'd say it's definitely most helpful to just use the resources that GMAC provided. That was most useful for me. But I will let Akshita so add.
Yeah. I will say like on average the GMAT score, and I know the new GMAT has a different scoring system, so just keep in mind that we are both speaking from experiences 2 years ago. So since the scoring has changed, we might not know what's the latest. But back then it was a 800, it was a scoring on 800 up to 800. And I would say typically 700 plus was considered good. So you can manage with a 700 plus, but to be truly competitive, like try to hit the average of that school's GMAT score. So even for GSB or Stanford, it was 730. That was my exact score. And I felt comfortable in that situation. So yeah, just go on the website, look at the admissions page, look at past GMAT scores and then find your comfortable like number there. In terms of resources, I used eGMAT, which is this online like online course that then they do verbal and they do quant. Um, I found that very helpful for verbal. And beyond that, you can leverage, I think, asking around for people who are also preparing and then using resources from across their tuition networks or anything that they have is also helpful. I think the GMAT is a lot about like getting more reps in and more practice so that like you have muscle memory when you see a certain question. And so just practicing a lot, I think should be helpful.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Another question that is in main chat is with regard to the work experience requirement, do you happen to know how business schools evaluate the work experience which overlaps with studies? I have a couple years of work experience, but graduated only this year.
My hunch is that they would consider full-time work as work experience. While I don't think we should discount sort of the experience you've had with your sort of education, but I think in terms of like work experience years, so to say, it might be the full-time years that will count. Um, but I think it's such a specific situation might actually be useful to connect with people who do sort of application support, things like that. They might have more insight into it. I think it's a very yeah, specific situation. But Akshata, I don't know if you have better answer there.
Yeah, I think having work experience while you're, in college, in undergrad is great. And I think that adds value to your resume, to your essays, and it kind of shows that, you've been developing your skills and you're motivated towards specific things. But again, I think to Jaya's point, it does not officially count as work ex towards full time. Yeah, I think that also I wouldn't rush to apply if even if you have a few years of part-time experience, because the value of coming in with a few years of full-time experience and then sitting in an MBA classroom where people have come from all these different industries, have come from, say three, like in Jaya's case, 3 years to now some cases 10 years of work experience. You want to be able to have the same level of conversations. You want to be able to understand things they're saying and truly like bring examples from your past into the classroom and then take the learnings back. I think the value is highest if you have more experience or like at least the average experience, which is like 4 to 5 years. And so if you're not in a rush, I would get some full-time experience.
Great. Another question, I know I'm getting all of them in my DMs, is that Akshita, this is specifically for you. How much of an entrepreneurial experience does Stanford provide?
Um, so, well, I think the one big thing is that being based in Silicon Valley or the Bay Area, you have a lot of venture capitalists, you have a lot of other entrepreneurs who are building around you. So I think the one thing is that if you're in that environment, you're constantly hearing about it. I think that helps you go in a certain direction if you want to be a founder. The second thing is that Stanford has a lot of entrepreneurial experiential courses. So there's something called Startup Garage. There's something called Lean Launchpad. There's something called Launchpad, and you basically enroll in these classes with an idea, and that's like a way for you to, explore a problem area, think about solutions you want to build, and use that time in class to actually build something or test something out in a safe way. And then if you truly are building something towards, in your program or towards the end of your program, the university and like many, I would say, sub-organizations within the university offer grants or funding of some sort for you to kind of, kick your startup off the ground. So I would say in those ways, Stanford really does foster innovation and entrepreneurship. And I think even access to people. So if you want to speak to other founders or other people in building in the same area as you, the access on campus is very, very good.
Another question that's come in my DM is I don't have work experience. I'm applying directly after undergrad. How would you suggest that I make my application stand out?
I
I
would
think
maybe
maybe
recommend.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I would recommend the 2+2 program. I don't know if the deadlines are still, if you can still meet the deadlines, but that might be your best bet. Again, depends on which school you're applying to or which universities you're targeting, but they typically will not admit people without experience. And so the 2+2 program is a way for you to get admission while you're in your final year of undergrad and then work for 2 years and then have a guaranteed admission after those 2 years are over. So if you want to be on the lower end of the work experience, if you don't want to be, delaying your MBA, that is one path you can look at. Wharton, Columbia, Stanford, I think these schools definitely have a deferred program, and I think if you look around, there'll be more. Jaya, do you wanna add to that?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay.
I see a question, Misbah, in the general chat. Do you have something in your okay? So I think this question is around having masters in the financial field, having diversified work experience, and should you go for an MBA if you want to pivot into consulting? I wouldn't say it's necessary. Like, I know consulting firms also value varied experiences, so you can try to apply directly. I think it is a very personal decision in terms of because you cannot go for a business for an MBA for 2 years where you'll not be earning for 2 years just to sort of get into consulting, right? Like there is ways to pivot directly. I think it's just reevaluating like from a personal growth perspective on like do you feel like there are other areas where you want to upskill, right? Like for example, for me, I was talking about how I had experience in like online education, which was amazing. I enjoyed my time, but I wanted to sort of upskill myself in a lot of other sort of functional parts of business. That sort of almost preparing me for that transition into consulting, right? So I think you did mention you have diverse experience. So I don't know what all of that is, but I think it's gonna have to be a little bit of self-reflection on what makes more sense. Is there a gap in terms of skills that needs to be filled um, to make that pivot? So I don't think there's like a either or, like one right answer. It's very personal.
I know we're almost at the end of the 1 hour, but there's one more question, so maybe we can take that and then
Mhm.
close the session. Uh, uh, okay. If one has a development sector background, would it put them at a disadvantage when applying for an MBA? Is there a preference for those with a more corporate sector background?
Sorry, can you just say the first part again? If you have more of what background?
If one has a more development sector background.
I don't think so. I think work experience is working like I've truly like in my cohort of MBAs met people who come from such different backgrounds like wouldn't have had a chance to meet them if it wasn't for that. So I don't think there is sort of a specific type of background you need to have. I think what's more important is just working on all of these aspects of the application that we spoke about and making sure that you're truly reflecting how you personally view your growth, irrespective of where that was, how MBA fits into that, and how that all fits into what's next. I think that story is more important than any sort of other aspects of your
Yeah, I
experience.
can add to that a little bit. I think some schools will also even appreciate that experience because you're bringing a diverse perspective to the classroom, to Jaya's point. I have people in my class who were ex-teachers, who worked at nonprofits, who worked for the government, who are ex-lawyers. So I think it truly, I mean, whatever aspect of development you're coming from or whatever vertical you're coming from, I think that doesn't matter as much. But yeah, I think making sure that you're explaining your experience in a way that makes sense to the school and that you're saying why you're looking for the MBA is important. Like the why MBA aspect should be very clear that, okay, I'm coming from this development sector, but I want to pivot into XYZ. Like if you're coming from climate, you're working in a climate NGO, now you want to go into climate finance. So you want to tell them, hey, like I want to build these skills, I want to learn how to do this, XYZ, and so I need the MBA. I think that story should help you.
Hey, Another question. Sorry, guys. Are you okay to answer that one?
It's fine.
Okay. Would a high GMAT score weigh in if I don't have a very impressive work experience?
What does not impressive work experience mean?
Like,
Uh,
yeah, I guess maybe like I don't know, maybe not in the field that they want to go in, perhaps. Or
Or maybe it's like a couple of years doing the same thing in the same place, which I think is not impressive, by the way. If that's where this is coming from, I don't think that is not impressive work experience. It's because irrespective of where you are, what you're doing, you are growing. The fact that you're sort of thinking about applying this shows to me that you think about personal growth. So I'd imagine that you sort of thought about that even while you've been working. So I'd say, but answering that fundamental question of like, will it cover up? I don't think anything covers up. Each part has different weightage in your application, so there'll be some spikes, some not spikes. But I don't think there's a way to sort of make up for one over the other. You just want to make sure you have enough spikes in your application for them to be excited about you.
Yeah, but at the same time, if it's like a crazy GMAT score, like a 780, like then they're gonna look at that and be like, okay, wow, like what happened here? What did this person do? But at the same time, if your resume is like you've never worked, or like, your growth hasn't been uh that I mean, your trajectory has not been that clear, or like you haven't had one, then that won't make up for it. But I think having both be at a decent level, maybe having one over the other is fine. Like there will be spikes in either or.
great. I think that is all, hopefully. And I will close the session now, yeah, because it's been an hour, and Jaya and Akshita will start their day now. Uh, Yeah, thank you so much, Akshita and Jaya, really for joining very early in the morning, where you are, and speaking to everybody and being so patient with all of the questions. And thank you everybody who joined us today. Hope you have a nice rest of your weekend. Yes.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Good luck with the applications. Yeah.
Yeah, echo that. Excited to be here, and let us know if we can help in any other way, Misbah.
Definitely will do that. Thank you guys. All right.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.